In Chapter 4, we'll be modelling the arms and making sure to keep the definition of the shoulder and the underarm. We'll then model some wrapped bandages around the forearms. We start off directly from the end of the last chapter, modelling the torso. And we've got 2 gaps in the mesh so that we can model the arms. Luckily, we'll only have to model one side, and if I just come into the properties with N and turn on the background image again, it should be all in the same spot. And in our concept art here, our reference plate, the left arm is pointing straight out, and we will model to that one. I'm also going to just make the window a little bit taller over to the top right and put my arm into the view there so I have some reference from David's design. Firstly, I'll Alt right click to select the entire loop around the gap where we'll model our arm. And from there I'm just going to extrude the entire lot across and just move it in the x-axis, at which point I can just move the vertices to match up as best I can with the reference in the front view there. Down the bottom area there you can see the concept art shows the tricep that's bulging out, and then it dips in a little and then bulges out once again at the front where we have the bicep. So my main aim is to define loosely these 2 muscle groups. Once again, it is cloth though, so I'm not going to over-define the shape, but just to give an indication of it, that it's underneath the cloth. By going into side view, you can see much better. On the left there is going to be the bicep poking out, and at the bottom right, the tricep will come out. And you may think that the bicep is the largest muscle on the arm usually, but quite often, especially if someone's been working out, the tricep will be the muscle that is much larger and gives a lot of the arm its size. And some of the lower vertices there I'm going to push in a little bit closer to the armpit. And when I'm happy with that, I'll extrude again, and I'm just scaling on x-axis there to squish all the vertices a little bit more lined up. As I get further away from the armpit, I'd like to have the vertices a little bit smoother in a circle. And that first extrusion I made was really to push out the muscles, and now I begin to take note of the 2 vertices that I have there that represent the bicep muscle, and there's 2 edge loops there that make a row of faces that really define the size of the tricep, and I'll start pushing those in towards the center a bit more, just to show that the muscle is bulging out and then coming back in as it reaches the elbow. So I'm pretty happy with the general size and thickness of the arm at this point, and the bicep and the tricep. So now I just need to define the shape a little more by making a loop cut here along the chest, just underneath the bicep. I can push these vertices inward, and that will show the bicep round inward a little bit more and help define the shape. And after I get the bicep definition looking good, I'll move on to the armpit area. And what I'm basically aiming for is the dip inward at the front, but the pec also comes out at the front as well. So you've got this dip inward, and then you've also got the muscles just at the back of the armpit there. You can feel them if you lift up your arm. And after some tweaking, I'll make another extrusion out, and once again scale the vertices along the x-axis to make them a little bit straighter. And just down at the lower area of this cross section here is going to be the elbow coming out the bone. And that basically lines up with where the tricep was. So the bicep starts getting a bit smaller, the bicep muscle, so I'm grabbing those vertices at the front and scaling them down a bit. And also the top and bottom starts to taper outward as the forearm begins to come in. You've got the forearm and bone there, both contributing to the thickness. So where the bicep and the tricep is causing the arm to be quite wider horizontally at the top area of the arm, in the forearm it will be a bit opposite. And by just grabbing this vertice and pulling it out, that can help give the shoulder muscle a little bit more length. We have our smaller cross section for the elbow. Now I'm going to make another extrusion out and just scale on the Z-axis a little bit to make it a bit longer vertically. Now I'm going to push some of these vertices back at the front, as we're going to have the crease of the front of the elbow here. And also there's going to be a bone there and muscle at the top of the forearm. And just like I did with the bicep, I'm going to have one vertice dip down just to show the difference between the forearm muscle and then the bone that sticks out and makes the elbow. Another extrusion now to flesh out some more of the forearm. I'm going to just hit W and select smooth. And again, scale a bit on the Z-axis and also a bit on the X-axis to flatten the vertical manner of the vertices a bit, to make them all a bit straighter. And finally, I've just gone and extruded it a couple more times all the way to the wrist. In top view now, I'm just scaling along the Y-axis, just to make the wrist thin out a little bit more as it reaches the wrist. And then I'll just tweak the vertices in this wrist area. You can always have a look at your own wrist or any anatomy that you see online or in a book. And that's helping me define how many loop cuts I have here for this level of detail, and where to push in and push out the mesh to give the indication that there's a muscle or bone pushing the cloth outward. If I need to make any area a little bit fatter and a little less flat, I can always just select a couple of vertices and Alt-S to puff them out. And be careful not to make the wrist too fat. That's something that can always happen. If you actually look at even people who are quite muscular, their wrists usually don't take on much muscle at the point right near the hand, but as it goes further back towards the elbow, you'll get some tapering that will occur. So that's the arm modeling done. So from this point I'm going to uncheck the background image, and I'm going to begin adding some bandage cloth around the forearm. I'll select this loop of vertices and then separate it with P by selection, and then go into its edit mode, scale it out a bit, and just flatten the vertices by scaling along the X-axis. And now we're going to use a really cool modifier called the shrink wrap modifier. And if I just select that from the add modifier menu, you won't see much straight away, but if I extrude the vertices out from this circle, I'll smooth the mesh. Just hit Control N in edit mode with all the vertices selected to make sure all the normals are corrected. And then down here under the target of the shrink wrap modifier, I'm just going to select that, and my arm mesh is mesh 020. I must admit I'm a little lazy with naming. But now you notice if I select that as the target object, it will wrap the mesh that I made around the arm, around the forearm in this case. Now I'm going to come down and just change the offset amount, and that will give an offset to how far away from the mesh it sticks. I'm going to put that to 0.02, and that will allow it to stick to the mesh visibly close enough, yet still far enough away that it won't cause any intersections or overlapping. Now I'm just going to hit the number here to make it its own material. That will make it single user. And then I'm going to darken the material. So what we have here now is our first bandage. And by duplicating the object outside of edit mode, and then going back into edit mode, I can just edit by rotating and moving the mesh. And even though they're cylinders, this should give the effect of one bandage being wrapped around many times. To give the look of each wraparound being over the top of the next, I've just changed the first bandage to an offset of 0.03, and then the one that I duplicated to 0.02. And I've just made that its own single user material, and just made it a little bit lighter, so I can distinguish between the bandages and the arm, and also bandages between themselves. So I'm going to grab the darker material bandage I have here and just move it to make my third, and I'll switch between darker and lighter bandages just for my own reference as I'm modeling them, and later on I'll put them all back into one material. And as I duplicate and place a new bandage, I'm just going to each time take up the offset by 0.01, and each time that will show as if the bandage is being wrapped over the top and overlapping, just like a real bandage. I'm making the cylinder different angles and different amounts of rotation just to not make it too similar, and sometimes even reversing the rotation. And I need to make sure that each cylinder is larger than the forearm, otherwise it will cause problems. So if in doubt, just scale out the cylinder larger, because it doesn't matter how much further it is outside the forearm, it will then shrink wrap around. So as long as it's on the outside, the modifier will work properly. And I can always just grab individual vertices and just push and pull them out to make the bandage thicker or thinner. So if there's any gaps there between two bandages, I can always just slide some vertices across to hide the gaps. So luckily you can cheat a lot here. I basically also on my external monitor just Googled some bandages in Google image search, and I just have them up. And we now have the basic bandages ready to add details to. I'm just going to box select all of them and then deselect the torso object as a quick way to select all the bandage objects. Now if I join them, you'll see that I lose all the individual offsets that I had on the bandages. Now that's a little bit of an inconvenience, but something we can work around quite easily. If I just undo and go back to each bandage being its own object, I'll demonstrate on the first bandage here. I'm just going to select it and then apply the shrink wrap modifier, along with the subsurf modifier at subsurf level 1, so that when I apply the subsurf, it doesn't have a highly dense mesh. So now with that done, we can join all the objects together, and oops, you'll notice if one of them has been missed, because it will suddenly pop out to its original position. Now you'll see that the mesh is twice as dense since we applied the subsurf modifier, but that's okay. I'm just going to select all the vertices, extrude, right click to cancel the auto move, and then just scale with Alt S inward a little. And with the extruded faces still selected, I'm just going to delete them, and that will help keep the mesh clean. And I'm just going to come in and add another subsurf modifier with a subsurf level of 1. And then I'm just going to delete whatever unneeded vertices I can of the original forearm, but not any that will reveal any gaps in the elbow. And now I'll make the whole bandage into one material, now that I don't need the reference anymore. And that's looking pretty good. From here, I'm just going to select these loops here at the edge that were offset from before and just scale them down so that they match up with the skin around the elbow. And of course, you can select any of the edges of the bandages and just scale them to stop any intersections that may appear. And of course, I'm going to go in and use proportional editing connected mode just down here in the header. And by using the mouse wheel to scroll the radius of effect, I can just clear up any gaps. So after some final tweaks, we have a finished arm and a bandaged forearm. Now there is one slight problem, as in we're not modeling in mirrored mode because of we had to attach it to our torso. And by selecting all the vertices in the arm plus some vertices in the torso there, just to make sure there aren't any gaps, I'm just going to duplicate those vertices and then use the hotkey combo after placing the cursor at the torso origin, full stop, S, X key, minus key, and then 1. And that will pivot scaling by the cursor, and then simply we're scaling to the amount of -1 to achieve a flip. Now you can see I've moved some of the vertices in the torso area here as well. So basically I can match the original vertices and merge them to the modified ones just by selecting the original, then the modified one second, and merging at last. And there's only a couple of points where I moved the vertices around after applying mirror. Most of them will be completely overlapped, but there is a case here where I did make a loop cut to define the bicep, so I'm going to make one also on this side of the torso. And then just to make sure all the vertices are merged together and there aren't any doubled vertices, I'm going to just come into the toolbar and after box selecting all those vertices, choose remove doubles. And down here at the bottom, I can change the merge threshold, and I can just real time slide that left and right and real time see the results of my merging. And I want to merge it far enough, I want to make the threshold large enough that the vertices that I had that were close to each other merge without any unwanted vertices merging themselves together and creating some ugly topology and tries. And if I reach a point where it starts merging vertices that I don't want it to, and I've still got some left that I do want to join, I'll just have to go in and manually connect them and merge them together as I had before. So with the top arm successfully mirrored, I'll just do the same with the bandages. You'll notice that the bandages origin isn't at the same place as the 3D cursor and the torso's origin. So by hitting spacebar and typing origin, I'm just going to select set origin and then choose the origin to 3D cursor from the menu. And that will just place the object's origin at the same place as the torso without moving any of the vertices around. And with that is our arms finished. So we have the arms looking nicely with the underarm and connecting nicely to the shoulder, and the bandages wrapped around the forearm. So from there we can work on the hands and really complete the upper part of the body.